Good afternoon. So today's book, it's one that I actually really want to read. I hope it's a good one. Hopefully you'll enjoy it too. It might be a little too old for you, but we'll see how the book goes. It's called Code Talker. And what it is it's about Navajo Indians who, back in World War II, helped out American Marines and soldiers in the war to be able to communicate, but make sure that nobody else could understand what they were saying. So it's a really interesting part of American history that I've always wanted to read about. And so I got the book. It doesn't look like it has any pictures in it, so I'm not going to hold it up like this to read. But I will read at least the first maybe chapter or two or three. We'll see how it goes. But I hope you enjoy it. All right? Love you. Wait, I think there was a... Here we go. Listen, my grandchildren. Grandchildren, you asked me about this medal of mine. There is much to be said about it. This small piece of metal holds a story that I was not allowed to speak to for many winters. It is the true story of how Navajo Marines helped America win a great war. There is much that I must remember to speak for this medal, to tell its story as it should be told. I must remember not only the great secret with which I was trusted, but also all that happened to me and those like me. That is a lot. But I think that I can do it well. After all, I was expected to remember, as were the other men trained with me. The lives of many men depended entirely on our memories. Look here. The man you see riding a horse on the back of this medal was an Indian. He is also one of those raising that flag there behind him. I knew him when we were both young men. His name was Ira Hayes. He was a fine person, even though he was not one of our people, but Akimel Oadam, a Pima Indian. We both fought on distant island far off in the Pacific Ocean. There was smoke all around us from exploding shells, the snapping sound of Japanese .25 caliber rifles, the thumping of mortars and the rattling of machine guns. We could hear the pitiful cries of wounded men, our own Marines, and the enemy soldiers too. It was a terrible battle, but our men were determined as they struggled up that little mountain. On top of it is where Ira was photographed raising the flag of Nehima. I was not one of those who fought on top of Mount Suribachi, but I had my own special part to play. I helped send the message about our success, about the brave deeds so many Marines did that day for Nehima. Nehima, our mother. That is the Navajo word we chose to mean our country, this United States. It was a good name to use. When we Indians fought on those far-off islands, we always kept the thought in our minds that we were defending our mother, the sacred land that sustains us. Nehima is only one of the Navajo words we chose for places. With Bilagana's names, South America became Sha de a Nehima, our mother to the south. Alaska became Bihai, with winter. Because we knew that Britain is an island, we gave it the name of Tota, surrounded by water. When we did not know much about a place, we described something about the people there. So we named Germany Bich Ahi, Iron Hat, and Japan was Bina Adals Ozai, Slant Eyes. Sometimes we didn't know much about either the country or the people there, but that did not stop us. We used our sense of humor and played with the English. The word we used for Spain was Debe de Ni, which means sheep pain. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I have not even explained to you yet why we made up such names. I have not told you why being able to speak our Navajo language, the same Navajo language they tried to beat out of me when I was a child, was so important during World War II. It was because I was a Navajo code talker. What was a code talker, and what did we code talkers do? Why was the secret we shared so great that we would not tell even our families about it until long after the war ended? You cannot weave a rug before you set up the loom. So I will go back to the beginning, pound the posts in the ground, and build the frame. I will start where my own story of words and warriors begin. Chapter 1, Sent Away. I was only 16-year-old and I was worried. I sat behind our hogan, leaning against its familiar walls and looking up toward the mesa. I hoped I would see an eagle, for that would be a good sign. I also hoped I would not hear anyone call my name, for that would be a sign of something else entirely. But the eagle did not appear. Instead, my mother's voice, not much louder than a whisper, broke the silence. Kiyasi, come, your uncle is in the wagon. The moment I dreaded had arrived. I stood and looked toward the hills. I could run up there and hide, but I did not do so, for I had always obeyed my mother, whose love for me was as certain as the firmness of the sacred earth beneath my moccasins. However, I did drag my feet as I came out from behind our hogan, to see what I knew I would see. There stood my tall, beautiful mother. Her thick black hair was tied up into a bun. She was dressed in her finest clothing, a new silky blue blouse and a blue pleated skirt, decorated with bands of gold ribbons. On her feet were soft calf-high moccasins, and she wore all her silver and turquoise jewelry. Her squash blossom necklace, her bracelets, her concha belt, her earrings. I knew she had adorned herself with all these things for me. She wanted me to have this image of her in my mind to keep, to be with me when I was far from home. However, the thing I saw most clearly was what she held in her arms. It was a small bundle of clothes tied in a blanket. My heart sank. I really was going to be sent away. My mother motioned toward the door of our hogan and went inside. My great-grandfather was waiting for me on his bed. He was too weak to walk and so old that he had shrunk in size. He had never been a big man, but now he was almost as small as me. Great-grandfather took my hand in both of his. Be strong, Kayasi. He rasped, his voice as creaky as the old saddle. I stood up on my toes so that I could put my arms around his neck and then pressed my cheek against his leathery face. Kiyazi, he said again, patting my back, our dear little boy. I had always been small for my age. My father used to tease me about it, saying that when I was born, he made my cradle board out of the handle of a wooden spoon. My baby name was Awiyazi, little baby. Little I was, and little I stayed. I went from being Awiyazi, little baby, to Kayazi, little boy. You are small, my grandfather said, as if he could hear what I was thinking, but your heart is large. You will do your best. I nodded. When I stepped outside, my mother bent down and embraced me, much harder than my grandfather had hugged me. Then she stepped back to stand by the door of our hogan. Travel safely, my son, Mother said. Her voice was so sad. My father came up to me and put his broad, calloused hands on my shoulders. He too was wearing his best clothing and jewelry. Though he said nothing, I think father was even sadder than my mother. So sad that words failed him. He was shorter than her, but he was very strong and always stood so straight that he seemed tall as a log pine to me. His eyes were moist as he lifted me up to the wagon seat and then nodded. My uncle clucked to the horses and shook the reins. The wagon lurched forward. As I grabbed the wooden backboard to steady myself, I felt a splinter go into my finger from the rough wood, but I ignored the pain. Instead, I pulled myself around to turn back and wave to my parents. I kept waving even after we went around the sagebrush-covered hill, and I could no longer see them. Waving back at me, my father with his back straight and his hand held high. My mother with one hand pressed to her lips while the other floated as gracefully as a butterfly. I did not know it, but it would be quite some time before I saw my home again. The wheels of the wagon rattled over the ruts in the road. I waved and kept waving. Finally, my uncle gently touched me on the wrist. My uncle was the only one in the family who had ever been to the white man's school. His words had helped convince his sister, my mother, to send me to that faraway place. Now he was taking me there, to Gallup, where the mission school was located. Kayazi, he said, look ahead. I turned to look up at my uncle's kind face. His features were sharp, as hard and craggy as the rocks, but his eyes were friendly, and the little mustache he wore softened his mouth. I was frightened by the thought of being away from home for the first time in my life, but I was also trying to find courage. My uncle seemed to know that. Little boy, he said, sister's first son, listen to me. You are not going to school for yourself. You are doing this for your family. To learn the ways of the Biligana, the white people, is a good thing. Our Navajo language is sacred and beautiful, yet all the laws of the United States, those laws that we now have to live by, they are in English. I nodded, trying to understand. It was not easy. Back then, school was such a new thing for our people. My parents and their parents before them had not gone to school to be taught by strangers. They had learned all they knew from their own relatives, from the wise elders who knew many things, people who lived with us, people just like us. My uncle sat quietly for a time, stroking his mustache with the little finger of his right hand. The wagon rattled along, the horses' hooves clopped against the stones in the road. I waited, knowing that my uncle had not yet finished talking. When he stroked his mustache like that, it meant that he was thinking and choosing his words with care. It was important not to rush when there was something worthwhile to say. Then he sighed. "Ah," he said. "Your great-grandfather was your age when the Americans, led by Red Shirt, Kit Carson, made their final war against the Navajos. They wished either to kill us all or remove every Indian from this land. They did this because they did not know us. They did not really understand about the Mexicans." My uncle turned toward me to see if I understood his words. I politely looked down at my feet and nodded. I knew about the Mexicans. For many years, the Mexicans raided our camps and stole away our people. We were sold as slaves, so our warriors fought back. They raided the villages where our people were held as slaves, rescuing them and taking away livestock from those who attacked us. When the Americans came, my uncle continued, our people tried to be friends with them, but they did not listen to us. They listened to the Mexicans who could speak their language and said that we were bad people. Instead of helping to free us from slavery, the Americans ordered all the Navajos to stop raiding the slave traders. Some of our bands signed papers and kept the promise not to raid, but each Navajo band had its own headman. Not all of them signed such papers, so when all of our people did not stop raiding, the Americans made war on all of the Navajos. They burned our crops, killed our livestock, and cut down our peach trees. They drove our people into exile. They sent us on the long walk. Again, my uncle paused to stroke his mustache, and again I nodded. I had heard stories about the long walk from my great-grandmother. The whole Navajo tribe was forced to walk hundreds of miles to a strange and faraway place the white men called Fort Sumner. Hundreds of our people died along the way, and even more died there. The earth was salty and dry. Our corn crops failed year after year. Sometimes late winter storms swept in and men froze while they were trying to work the fields. Our people began to call that place Hueldi, the place where only the wind could live. Our people had no houses but lived in pits, dug into the earth. Indians from other tribes attacked us. We were kept there as prisoners for 4 winters. Even though I was a little boy, I knew this history as well as my own name. Kayazi, my uncle said, his voice slow and serious as he spoke. It was hard for our people to be so far away from home, but they did not give up. Our people never forgot our homeland, between the 4 sacred mountains. Our people prayed, they did a special ceremony, then the minds of the white men changed. Our people agreed never again to fight against the United States, and they were allowed to go back home. But even though the white men allowed us to come home, we now had to live under their laws. We had to learn their ways. That is why some of us must go to their schools. We must be able to speak to them, tell them who we really are, reassure them that we will always be friends to the United States. That is why you must go to school, not for yourself, but for your family, for our people, for our sacred land. As my uncle spoke, I saw my great-grandfather's face in my mind. There had been tears of love and pity in his eyes as I left Arhogan. I knew now that he had been remembering what it was like when he had been forced to go far away from home. He had been praying life would not be as hard for me at school as it had been for him at Hueldi. My uncle dropped his hand onto my shoulder. "Can you do this?" he asked me. "Yes, uncle," I said. "I will try hard to learn for our people and our land." We had reached the hill that marked the edge of our grazing lands. I had never gone beyond that hill before. As my uncle clucked again to the horse, I noticed the pain in my finger and saw the splinter still lodged in it. I carefully worked it free. The tip of that thin needle of wood was red with my blood. Before we went over the hill, I dropped it onto the brown earth. Although I had to go away, I could still leave a little of myself behind. So the next chapter is chapter 2, and this one is called boarding school. So he just gets to the school. I'm going to leave it there, leave that for you guys. See if you want to read it. If not, I am sure that I will read it whenever I get home. But anyways, it is a really interesting story, I'm sure of it. I've heard stories about this before, and what it was these, the Native Americans who lived here before everybody came over from Europe were used in the war to be able to talk to each other, to send information back and forth. And the Japanese couldn't understand, they couldn't figure out what they were saying because they'd never heard the language before. So, anyways, it should be a really good book. But without further ado, I hope you guys have a great day. It is 2019, it's already past the new year. Well, it will be whenever you receive this. Right now it's December 27th, 2018. I hope you guys had a great New Year's, and I'm looking forward to coming home. It's a few more weeks and then I'll be coming home, so I cannot wait to see you guys. I love you and miss you. Bye.